My name is János Fejes and I am the one responsible for Hungary's reputation today. In my presentation, I would like to give you an introduction to my current work under development. If you're interested in my work further, please look for my online surfaces on the links found on the slide. First of all, I would like to decipher the title of my presentation. Mythological Occult Metal was a compilation release of American black thrash metal band Absu. As the band's career revolved around these two main topics, it feels quite self-evident to have a genre-defining name for themselves. Now we are going to focus on the mythological part and not in the scope of the band, but of all metal music. My PhD dissertation was entitled as a reception of biblical and mythological patterns in the lyrics of extreme metal music. This dissertation had a qualitative scope, following a close reading related method to understand the reception of certain myths in metal lyrics. Since the very beginning of my academic work, these close reading related investigations were the main tool in my repertoire for two reasons. First, I have seen that most of the lyrics focusing academics also use this method, and second, as being a scholar of literature and religions, this method seemed to be the most useful. After the defense of my dissertation, I started to play with the thought of transforming it into a book, and now we arrive to the second big chapter. Without forgetting the original research method, I decided to open up for a quantitative world. In early 2020, I started to build up a database that would be my origo for all further investigations. The COVID pandemic forced us home as well, and as being so fortunate to be able to work from home, it gave the opportunity to spare time for this database. Now in the coming minutes, I would like to introduce you to this database of mine in its current state. The first question that occurred was to where to look for the lyrics, as naturally on an academic scale interest, one may not found their work on only the records they own. The once again self-evident starting point was Encyclopedia Metallum, the metal archives. Of course, I am aware of the problematic features of this website, mainly rooting in its Wikipedia-like openness on the one hand, and the strict aesthetic interests of the admins on the other hand, but this website is the most extensive source of data and, more importantly, of lyrics. My working method in connection with the lyrics was an extensive research on Encyclopedia Metallum, which resulted in individual readings of lyrics and their individual evaluations. This means I did not use any kind of program to analyze the lyrics, but did that in an old-fashioned, or to be a bit more fashionable, in an artisan way. Let us see now what is in the database. First, here is the question of the mythologies covered. Here we have the 6 different areas, of all which are quite familiar for anybody interested in mythological metal music. My whole interest is beginning with the mythologies, makes them the focal points, whereas metal music is working in this regard, making the mythologies are slightly more important than the metal lyrics themselves. The list here may follow my tentative later works flow as well. Viking mythology is a kind of a must-have in connection with this topic, but as it is the most widespread issue, thus it is also a great ground for comparisons. Greek and or Hellenistic mythologies cover all that is connected to the eastern basin of the Mediterranean, and now Roman mythology and religion is not covered, as Roman culture, according to my experience, is more interesting for metal from a historical and not a mythological aspect. After that, we have the Egyptian and Mesopotamian mythologies, whereas in case of Mesopotamia, both the Akkadian and the Sumerian tradition are investigated. We must not deny that the Old Testament is a religious text filled with myths that are inspiring for metal musicians as well, thus the ancient Near East trio is ending with the Old Testament. In case of Celtic cultures, the insular, or the Irish, and the continental or the Gallic world are also included in the analysis. The idea behind this collective is of twofold. First, these are the mythologies that mostly define Western thought, and secondly, these are the cultures that I have studied extensively before, thus my knowledge is the most trustworthy in case of these mythologies. Naturally, African, Asian, and American culture should be covered in future researches. Let's see now the raw information about the database. As of today, the database contains 1,462 individual items. This means that same amount of songs that are qualified for the database can be found here. This amount is a result of individual reading of at least 10,000 lyrics. The time span of the database embraces more than 4 decades, starting in 1980 and ending with present year. We have 203 different bands coming from 38 countries from all around the world, listing a sum of 465 albums. Naturally, this database is not full, but I am more than sure that nobody may ever desire or dare to state that a database is ready and cannot be expanded anymore. The difficulties of getting information and the choice of frames also made the database to be an incomplete one. There are some important details in connection with this database. First of all, I have to state that all songs are put into the database on their own. This means that in case of a concept album, the songs are separated and listed individually without their original context. It is needed for that in case of a concept album, maybe one designated myth is covered, but the songs themselves have connections to other myths, thus should be separated from each other. The other case is the problem of syncretism. Now I refer to those songs that involve more than one culture's figures in their texts, and not the Hellenistic mythological figures. Thus, if a song can be classified into different culture sub-databases, then those are put there. The database itself was in a later phase edited into one big master list. Its original structure contained the culture-wise sub-tables. Now we arrive to the case of classification, or the method behind the sorting of the songs. There are 8 different information in connection with all the items. 5 of these are simply descriptive, like the year of its release, the author or performer of the song, the origin of the song, meaning the album, then the origin of the performer, and last but not least, the title of the item. The content focal elements contain mythological theme, topic, and method of reception. Let us see these later 3 from a bit closer now. Mythological theme. After localizing the culture where a song can be put, then the exact mythological theme had to be deciphered. It could be a host of different topics like a named story, a figure, a place, always that element that gives the main motif and the backbone of a song. The main difficulty in case of this question arises when a bigger narrative's minor characters are in the focus. For example, if any episode of the Viking myth Ragnarok is presented, but it is clear that the whole Ragnarok storyline is the important element, then that mentioned song would be classified in the mythological theme category as Ragnarok and not as the figure that is represented. The second important element is topic. To understand what this category means, I may point to its differences with mythological theme. While mythological theme is a narrow and punctual classification, then topic is a wider, that is released from the ground of mythology itself and works with more general categories, for example, myth of a god, mythological figure, warfare, creation, end of the world, etc. It varies from culture to culture how many of these categories exist. You may notice that myth of a god and mythological figure are 2 separate categories, as I assume that the stories of the gods and minor figures differ from each other in importance, but this feature is not yet tested. Last but not least, here we have method of reception. The 6 categories seen here are a more developed version of my PhD thesis system. Let us see them in alphabetical order. Actualizing songs are the ones that give a relevant interpretation of a myth for our society. A great example is the Mabul album by Israeli Orphan Land that actualizes the biblical flood narrative for contemporary Muslim, Jewish, and Christian societies. Adaptation is one of the most direct types, where we see the musical interpretation of ancient texts. If a band creates music, for example, from an Eddic poem, and sings the poem in its original form, then that song would land here. Anti-Christian. It is a self-evident category, but as we are looking for the anti-Christian rhetoric in mythological lyrics, this category is not a crowded one. If New Testament mythology would be included as well, then it would be much more crowded, but it is excluded now. Extension. An original mythological narrative is either rewritten or continued by a song. In German biblical studies, this technique is known as Fortschreibung, a term widely used in case of ancient Near Eastern mythologies and religious scripture. Imaginary contains those songs that only use a mythological reference for a scenery. Many of the Viking songs about warfare that include a war cry to Odin or Thor could be found here. Last but not least, retelling is the other simple category where the songs are recited or the narrative of a myth is paraphrased in somehow. I would not open up the discussion now because I will get it to later, but I ask you to think about it a bit. What do you think, which of these categories is the most frequent, which are less frequent? We are going to see a bit about it in the end of the presentation. Using basic statistical analysis methods, the following research questions could be asked from the database. Which myths are the most popular in a culture? Are there regionally important myths? For example, which Viking myth is used the most times in Sweden or anywhere else? Which myths are adapted or actualized the most? Are there other regional differences? Naturally, all these questions are relevant in case of all cultures, so we may say that after the individual investigations, many comparative studies can be done from this source. Before thanking your time and attention, I would like to present you some case studies to see how the classification worked and works in this database. The zero example is a quotation from Greece's Rotting Christ. Enwalish from Theogonia was one of the earliest influences for me to start my path in investigating mythological metal, and it deals with the Babylonian creation epic. From the cited lines, you can clearly see that besides the song almost mimics many expressions of the original myth in an English version, or it was taken from the official English translation of this epic. Nevertheless, as it does not give any differing interpretation, merely just paraphrases the original, thus this retelling song working with the creation story that is Enwalish can be found in the Mesopotamian section of this database. If you want to see the problems with classification on a 3-level grade, then the easy level would be the song called Typhoon by the Swedish band Therion. Here we have a song that tries to actualize the narrative of the story, having a kind of an apocalyptic scenery where the Olympian gods are to be destroyed by a mythological monster, so we may say that this song could be categorized as an actualizing song. The medium-level case study emerges the problem of the bigger and the narrower narratives that I referred to before. Twilight of the Thunder God by Amon Amarth is a retelling song that focuses on the duel of Thor and Jormungand during the Battle of Ragnarok. Because of the importance of the wider narrative, thus this song is classified as the end-of-the-world song with the theme of Ragnarok. The hard level is presented now by Vatain's Waters of Ain, a quite cryptic song with a catabasis thematic that cannot be connected anywhere, but the mentioning of Kingu, another Babylonian figure of the Enwalish, in the later part of the song helps us decipher this song to be an extension, one focusing on the underworld with the thematic choice of the said Babylonian epic. Before saying goodbye now, I would like to show you the method of reception data of this collection that I asked to think about a bit. Based on the master list of all the songs, we may say that in connection of the 6 cultures, the biggest majority of the songs tend to simply retell a story. 1/4 of the items like to extend the story, while actualizing is only around 15%. Imaginary songs are not that significant, but the real White Ravens are adaptations and anti-Christian songs. Where I would like to present my results of the future. First of all, I presented some months ago at the Nordic Metal Music Seminar the Viking part of this database, and some days ago I received news that a publication was accepted at the Hungarian Classical Studies Journal for the Greek part of my database. So I would like to have as many conference speeches and articles that are focusing on smaller portions of this whole topic, but I plan to rewrite my thesis, as it was mentioned before, to become a complex volume where the quantitative statistical big picture would be illustrated with close reading qualitative case studies, looking for the questions that are presented on this slide. On this point, I would like to thank you for your kind attention and interest. If you have any questions, please ask away. If you do not have any now, but would like to stay in touch, then please reach out for me on the link seen on the slide. Thank you very much again.